The Unexplained Disappearance of D.B. Cooper. Imagine boarding a plane on a quiet November afternoon in 1971. The world feels simpler no TSA lines, no body scanners, no strict bag checks. Air travel is considered glamorous, even casual. People walk onto flights with little more than a ticket stub and a smile. Security checks are almost non-existent, and no one in their wildest imagination expects what's about to unfold. Among the boarding passengers is a man in his mid. He wears a dark business suit, a neat tie, and a trench coat. In his hand, he carries a black briefcase. Nothing about him seems unusual. To most, he looks like an ordinary businessman traveling for work. He is calm, polite, and almost forgettable, exactly the kind of man who draws no attention. But in a matter of hours, his name will be forever etched into the pages of unsolved history. He writes his name on the passenger list as Don Cooper, though a later mistake by a reporter will misidentify him as D.B. Cooper. The name the world will never forget. Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 departs Portland, Oregon, headed for Seattle, Washington. On board are 36 passengers and 6 crew members. The flight is short, just 30 minutes, and everything appears routine. Passengers settle into their seats, flipping through magazines, chatting, or gazing out the window. But somewhere in the cabin, Don Cooper is preparing to make history. A few minutes after takeoff, Cooper presses the call button and signals a flight attendant. He hands her a folded note. She assumes it's just another flirtatious message after all. Flight attendants often receive them from businessmen traveling alone. Without even looking, she slips the note into her pocket and starts to walk away. But Cooper leans toward her and whispers, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Her heart skips. She unfolds the paper, and in neat handwriting it reads, "Miss, I have a bomb. Sit next to me. This is no ordinary passenger." Trembling, she sits. Cooper opens his briefcase just enough to show her inside. She sees wires, red sticks that resemble dynamite, and a large battery. Whether it's real or not, she doesn't dare test him. Fear runs through her, but she remains composed, as trained. The hijacking has begun. Unlike the violent criminals people picture, Cooper is strangely polite. He doesn't yell. He doesn't threaten unnecessarily. In fact, he's calm, soft-spoken, and oddly respectful. Later, witnesses would recall that he seemed almost like a gentleman, well-spoken, confident, and in control. He even orders a bourbon and soda, pays for it in cash, and tips generously. But beneath his composed manner, his demands are serious. He wants $200,000 in cash, for parachutes, and a fuel truck ready in Seattle to refill the plane for the next leg of his plan. The instructions are precise, almost military-like. The crew relays the message to the cockpit. The captain contacts air traffic control, and the FBI is immediately alerted. Never before has such a crime unfolded mid-air in the United States. Federal agents scramble, gathering the ransom, organizing parachutes, and mobilizing emergency response. Hours tick by in tense silence. The passengers remain unaware of the danger until later. Cuba, oddly patient, chats politely with the crew. He seems knowledgeable about aviation, even commenting on flight paths and altitudes. It's clear this is no impulsive act. This man has planned everything carefully. By the time the plane lands in Seattle, the demands have been met. The ransom money, $200,000 in $20. Bills is waiting, as are 4 parachutes. The passengers are released safely, stepping off the plane unharmed, many still unaware of how close they were to danger. Only Cooper, the crew, and his mysterious suitcase remain aboard. The next stage begins. The plane takes off again, this time with Cooper instructing the pilots to head south toward Mexico City. But soon, as the aircraft glides into the stormy night skies over Washington state, Cooper makes his move. At around 10,000 feet, he orders the rear staircase of the Boeing 727 to be lowered. Against the roar of wind and rain, he straps the money to his body, adjusts a parachute, and without hesitation jumps into the freezing November darkness. When the plane finally lands in Reno hours later, the impossible truth emerges. D.B. Cooper is gone. No manna, no parachute. No ransom, money, only silence. The most audacious crime in aviation history has just been committed, and the man behind it has vanished without a trace. The FBI immediately launches one of the largest manhunts in American history. Thousands of leads pour in. Suspects are interviewed, photographs are studied, theories multiply. Yet the man called D.B. Cooper seems to have disappeared into thin air. Did he survive the daring jump, or did his escape become his fatal mistake? His body lost forever in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. The mystery has only just begun. The world becomes obsessed. Within hours of the hijacking, headlines stretch across newspapers, radio broadcasts, and television screens. Who was D.B. Cooper? Where did he go? Did he truly outsmart the FBI? Or did he die alone in the freezing wilderness that stormy night? These questions sparked debates in homes, schools, and workplaces across America. Coffee shops buzzed with theories. Neighbors exchanged wild guesses. Armchair detectives began connecting dots that may or may not have existed. The mystery was no longer just a crime, it was a story that captured the national consciousness. The FBI immediately launched a massive investigation, codenamed Noryok, short for Northwest Hijacking. At its height, over 1,000 suspects were identified. Agents tracked down men who resembled the witness sketches, interrogated former military paratroopers, and even investigated ex-convicts who might have had the nerve to pull off such a stunt. The suspect list grew enormous. There were former pilots who knew how planes operated. Ex-soldiers, familiar with parachutes and night jumps. There were career criminals who fit the profile of a risk. Even ordinary men were questioned simply because they looked vaguely like the composite drawing of Cooper. A middle-aged man with dark hair, sunglasses, and a calm demeanor. But despite hundreds of interviews and endless background checks, none could be definitively linked to the crime. Others simply didn't have the skills to match the daring of Cooper's jump. Even the tie he had been wearing left behind on his seat offered no real answers. As months turned into years, the case seemed destined to remain unresolved. But then, almost a decade later, in February 1980, a surprising discovery reignited the mystery. While digging in the sand, he uncovered 3 bundles of cash wrapped in elastic bands. The bills were badly decayed, yet still recognizable. When investigators examined them, the serial numbers matched perfectly with the ransom money given to D.B. Cooper in 1971. The discovery electrified the nation. It was the first physical evidence connected to the case since the night of the hijacking, but it only deepened the mystery. The amount found, $5.8, was just a small fraction of the ransom. Where was the rest of the money? How did only these few bundles end up buried in the sand nearly a decade later? Had Cooper intentionally hidden it, or had it washed downstream somehow? Theories multiplied. Some experts suggested that the money had been carried by the river-esque currents and deposited on the beach where the boy found it. Others believed Cooper might have buried it himself, only to vanish before retrieving the rest. But no further evidence ever appeared along the riverbanks, and no other cash from the ransom was ever spent or circulated. Theories about Cooper's fate became as legendary as the man himself. His parachute was old and primitive, not the kind used by modern jumpers. Experts argued that even a skilled paratrooper would have struggled to survive. Yet, the absence of a body or parachute fueled another school of thought: that he survived. Supporters of this theory point to Cooper's confidence in planning. He knew the Boeing 727's design well enough to request the rear staircase. He requested multiple parachutes, possibly as a trick to prevent authorities from giving him faulty equipment. To many, this was not the behavior of a desperate amateur, but of a man with knowledge and preparation. So, if he survived, who was he? The FBI had no shortage of suspects. One of the most compelling was Richard Floyd McCoy, a decorated Vietnam veteran. In 1970, just months after Cooper's disappearance, McCoy hijacked another plane in nearly identical fashion. He demanded $500,000, received it, and parachuted out, only to be caught 2 days later. Many believed he had to be D.B. Cooper, pulling off the crime twice. He even looked somewhat similar to the composite sketches. But the FBI dismissed him as a copycat, pointing out differences in age, appearance, and method. Another suspect was Kenneth Christensen, a former paratrooper and Northwest Airlines employee. A friend later recalled him making cryptic statements about D.B. Cooper, and on his deathbed, he allegedly confessed indirectly. Then there was Dwayne Weber, a man whose widow claimed he confessed to being Cooper before his death in 1995. According to her, Weber mumbled in his final days, "I am Don Cooper." She later connected odd details about his life, his criminal background, a knee injury that might have come from a parachute landing, and his habit of sleep-talking about leaving fingerprints on an airplane. Again, intriguing but never proven. Other names floated through the years. Military pilots, escaped convicts, skilled skydivers. Some suspects lived ordinary lives, while others had shady pasts. Each one seemed promising for a moment, but time and again, the evidence fell apart. As the investigation dragged on, D.B. Cooper transformed from a criminal into a cultural legend. He became a kind of modern outlaw hero like Jesse James or Billy the Kid. But from the age of air travel, books, documentaries, and television specials kept his story alive. Hollywood referenced him in movies and shows. Songs were written about him. People admired the mystery, and some even admired the man. Why? Because unlike most hijackers, Cooper had harmed no one. He was polite to the crew, never injured a passenger, and even tipped generously for his bourbon and soda. He embarrassed the FBI, pocketed a fortune, and seemed to vanish into thin air. To some, he was not just a criminal, but a symbol of rebellion, a man who beat the system and disappeared without a trace. Yet beneath the fascination, one unsettling truth remained. A man had hijacked a plane, threatened a bomb, and disappeared, and no one could explain how. The FBI poured decades into the case. For years, agents followed every lead, checked every tip, and analyzed every scrap of evidence. But as time passed, the trail grew colder. Witnesses aged, memories blurred, suspects dead. Eventually, in 2016, after 45 years of searching, the FBI officially closed the case. But closing the file didn't end the story. If anything, it made the legend of D.B. Cooper stronger, because now, without the possibility of official resolution, the case belonged to the public, and the public's imagination has never let go. Think about it for a moment. A man boards a plane with nothing more than a suit, a tie, and a black briefcase. He demands the equivalent of more than $1 million in today's money, walks to the back of the aircraft, lowers a staircase in mid-flight, and steps into the freezing November night, and then he is gone. No cameras, no digital trail, no DNA evidence. Just a man, a parachute, and the dark skies over Washington. Could such a crime even happen today? Almost certainly not. Modern airport security is relentless metal detectors, body scanners, identification checks, and cameras at every corner. The world D.B. Cooper lived in has vanished. But in 1971, during a brief window of history when commercial aviation was still innocent and unguarded, one man exploited that vulnerability and pulled off the only unsolved hijacking in U.S. history. The unanswered questions still echo more than 50 years later. If Cooper died in the jump, where is the body? Why has no parachute ever been found? Why did no one stumble across his remains in the forests of Washington, Oregon, or Nevada? If he survived, how could he vanish so completely? How could he live out his days without ever being caught, and without ever spending the ransom money in a way that raised alarms? Did he bury it in some secret location, planning to return for it? Or did he disappear overseas, carrying his fortune to another land where no one knew his name? Each theory opens new doors and leaves new gaps. Some insist that Cooper was a skilled paratrooper, perhaps a veteran who had jumped from planes in combat. They argue that he knew what he was doing, that he chose the Boeing 727 specifically because of its unique staircase, and that he planned his route with precision. If this is true, then Cooper may well have landed safely and blended back into society, perhaps living under a new identity, perhaps even living quietly among neighbors who never suspected the man next door had once pulled off the greatest heist in American aviation. Others argue the opposite. They point to the storm, the freezing winds, the pitch-black night, and the treacherous terrain. They remind us that Cooper's parachute was old and not suitable for controlled landings. They suggest he had no idea what he was really doing, that he panicked, leapt into the void, and perished before he ever touched the ground. In this version, D.B. Cooper never escaped at all. He simply disappeared into nature's grasp. His body never found. His money scattered or buried by rivers and soil. But then comes the tantalizing clue. The $5,800 in decayed bills discovered by a boy along the Columbia River in 1980. If Cooper had died in the jump, how did that money get there? Years later, miles from where he might have landed, was it washed downstream, carried by currents and floods? Or did Cooper himself bury it, leaving behind only a trace of his fortune, perhaps as a decoy? The bills answered one question, yes. The ransom was real, and yes, it survived, but they raised countless others. Over time, D.B. Cooper stopped being just a man. He became a legend, a myth woven into the fabric of American culture. He appeared in movies, television shows, novels, and songs. Comedians joked about him, storytellers dramatized him, and historians puzzled over him. He became a kind of ghostly outlaw man who hurt no one, embarrassed the government, and seemed to vanish into thin air. To some, Cooper represents rebellion against authority, a man who beat the system with brains instead of bullets. To others, he is a symbol of unsolved history itself, a reminder that even in the modern world where science and law enforcement reach into every corner, mysteries can still endure. And maybe that's why we can't let him go, because deep down, people are drawn to puzzles that resist answers. We love the thrill of wondering, what if? Over the decades, amateur sleuths, conspiracy theorists, and everyday citizens have all joined the chase. Thousands of theories circulate online. Some claim Cooper lived secretly in the Northwest until his death. Others suggest he became someone famous, hiding in plain sight. A few even believe he might still be alive, an elderly man smiling quietly at the legend he left behind. The FBI may have closed the case in 2016, but for the public, the case is anything but closed. Researchers pore over old documents. Enthusiasts organize expeditions into the wilderness. Online forums debate endlessly, comparing parachute models, weather reports, and FBI files. Each clue leads to another dead end, yet the chase never stops. What we know for certain is this: D.B. Cooper represents the ultimate strange disappearance in modern American history. A man who appeared out of nowhere, committed a crime with precision, and dissolved back into the shadows. Unlike other mysteries, this one has no clear resolution, no single theory that ties up all the loose ends. Instead, it remains frozen in time, a story that refuses to fade. And maybe that's the point. Maybe D.B. Cooper's real legacy is not in the money he stole, or even in his daring jump, but in the questions he left behind. Questions that will likely never be answered. Questions that keep his story alive half a century later. So Attaway are, decades later, still asking, what really happened to D.B. Cooper? Did he survive his legendary leap into the stormy night, living the rest of his days in quiet satisfaction? Or does his story lie buried somewhere deep in the forests of Washington, waiting for a hiker or a hunter to stumble across the final piece of the puzzle? That is for you to decide. If you enjoyed this journey into one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon, so you never miss more chilling tales of unsolved history and unexplained events. Share this story with friends who love a good mystery, and let's keep the legend of D.B. Cooper alive together. They only grow stronger with time.